Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, the films that shaped the MTV generation. If you ask any diverse group of Gen Xers to name the best comedy of the 80s, you're going to get a healthy number of votes for today's pick. The much-loved satirical rock and roll mockumentary from 1984, This is Spinal Tap. This is Spinal Tap follows the North American tour of a fictional English heavy metal band called Spinal Tap. That's Spinal Tap spelled with an umlaut over the N and a dotless I. It was the directorial debut of Rob Reiner, son of comedy legend Carl Reiner and one of the stars of the 1970s CBS sitcom All in the Family. Reiner still acts, but these days he's also well regarded as a director for such classic films as Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and, of course, This is Spinal Tap. The script for Spinal Tap was almost entirely improvised, and screenplay credit is shared between the film's 4 stars, Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, Harry Shearer, and Rob Reiner. Reiner tried to extend the screenplay credit to the entire cast, but the Writers Guild of America has very firm rules about that sort of thing and gave a thumbs down to the idea. Reiner, Shearer, McKean, and Guest had all worked together on a 1978 sketch comedy pilot called The TV Show, which included a sketch featuring a fictional band called Spinal Tap. A few years later, the quartet reunited to expand that sketch idea into a full-length mockumentary. This is Spinal Tap opens with an introduction from documentary filmmaker Marty DeBurgi, played by Reiner, who recalls how in 1966 he went to a Greenwich Village club called Electric Banana and heard a band that redefined rock and roll and is now known as one of England's loudest bands. Spinal Tap are touring the US to promote their newest album, Smell the Glove. Marty will be following them around, filming everything that goes on behind the scenes. We see a short montage of scenes of Spinal Tap arriving at JFK before taking the stage and performing their song, Tonight I'm Gonna Rock You Tonight. Everything about This is Spinal Tap manages to be both really, really funny and really, really plausible, and that starts with the music, which was written and performed by the actors. Tonight I'm Gonna Rock You Tonight is a stupid song with a stupid title, but it's also catchy. And while it's a parody, it hews closely enough to the subject it parodies, heavy metal music, to be entirely plausible as a heavy metal song that might have received some radio play in the early 80s. Afterward, the band members sit down with Marty to talk about Spinal Tap's origins. Spinal Tap was founded by childhood friends David St. Hubbins and Nigel Tufnell, both of whom perform vocals and guitar. David is played by Michael McKean, best known pre-Spinal Tap for playing Lenny on Laverne and Shirley, and who is still a prolific film and television actor, and who is married to Superman 3 and Smallville star Annette O'Toole. Nigel is played by Christopher Guest, who has directed several acclaimed mockumentaries in the style of Spinal Tap, including A Mighty Wind, Waiting for Guffman, and Best in Show, and who is married to Jamie Lee Curtis. Spinal Tap's bassist is Derek Smalls, played by Harry Shearer, a former SNL cast member who is well known for playing multiple characters on The Simpsons, including Ned Flanders and Mr. Burns. Spinal Tap's lineup at the time of the documentary also includes keyboardist Viv Savage, played by David Caff, the former keyboardist for Rare Bird, and drummer Mick Shrimpton, played by R.J. Parnell, the former drummer for Atomic Rooster. The band members tell Marty how they started the band in 1964 as the Originals, but there was also a group in the East End calling themselves the Originals, so they had to change that to the New Originals. But then the Originals changed their name to the Regulars, so the New Originals could have gone back to being the Originals, but instead they changed their name to the Thamesmen. The absurd genius of Spinal Tap, as played by McKean, Guest, and Shearer, is that as musicians, these guys are genuinely talented and skilled at what they do. But they're also a bunch of dim bulbs, but always in a plausible way. We have all seen interviews with famous musicians who seem a bit clueless, but in a way that seems like a logical extension of living in the bubble of fame. That's exactly the note Spinal Tap strikes. We see black and white footage of the Thamesmen performing Gimme Some Money. At this time, their drummer was Stumpy Pepys, played by Ed Begley Jr. As the band members tell Marty, Stumpy Pepys died in a bizarre gardening accident. He was replaced in the band by Stumpy Joe, who very tragically choked to death on someone else's vomit. Accompanied by their manager, Ian Faith, the band members arrive at a party sponsored by their record label, Polymer. Ian Faith is played by writer and actor Tony Hendra, who died earlier this month. They meet their publicist, Bobby Fleckman, who is played by Fran Drescher, future star of the CBS sitcom The Nanny. Drescher would reprise her Spinal Tap role on a Season 5 Nanny episode titled The Bobby Fleckman Story. Sir Dennis Eaton Hogg, the head of Polymer, gives a speech at the party to wish Spinal Tap luck on their tour. Sir Dennis is played by Patrick Macnee, famous for playing British spy John Steed on the 60s series The Avengers. The waiters at this party are all dressed as mimes and include Dana Carvey and Billy Crystal. The band members are chauffeured around New York by a chatty Frank Sinatra-worshipping limo driver who is played by the late character actor Bruno Kirby, known for City Slickers and When Harry Met Sally. On stage, the band performed their song Big Bottom, which includes the stupendous lyric, "My baby fits me like a flesh tuxedo, I love to sink her with my pink torpedo." The song is the finest ode to butts this side of Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby Got Back. We get our first indication all might not be going well with the tour when Ian tells the band their upcoming Boston gig has been cancelled. He reassures them not to worry about it because Boston isn't a big college town. Part of Spinal Tap's brilliance is how beautifully calibrated the jokes are in both substance and delivery. The first time I saw Spinal Tap, when I was in my early teens, I'm not even sure I registered Ian's line about Boston as a joke. Tony Hendra delivers it in a very dry and matter-of-fact way, and nobody stops the film to point out that the metropolitan Boston area actually includes a very large number of well-regarded colleges and universities. Spinal Tap does not stop down to let a joke sink in. If you don't get a joke, that's fine. Another joke will be coming at you in just a second. At another party, Bobby chats with Ian to raise Polymer's concern about the cover of the new album, Smell the Glove. The label finds it both sexist and offensive. The album's cover features a greased naked woman on all fours, wearing only a dog collar and leash, with a man's arm in the frame forcing her to sniff his black leather glove. Ian and the band members are indignant and incredulous at the very idea that anyone would find this objectionable. Backstage before a gig, Nigel melts down at the catering spread because the bread is much smaller than the cold cuts. He's upset, but he bravely tells Ian that he will rise above it because he's a professional. The band perform Hellhole, during which Nigel falls backward during his guitar solo and gets locked in place, requiring a roadie to rush on stage and help him up. Nigel shows Marty his impressive guitar collection. He also shows him his custom-made amp on which all the dials go up to 11. On most amps, the dials only go to 10, but this is one louder. Marty tries to point out that he could just make 10 louder, but Nigel is unable to comprehend this. He just repeats, "These go to 11. Spinal Tap has no shortage of quotable scenes, but the idea of going to 11, i.e. going beyond the maximum, has entered the pop culture consciousness to such an extent that plenty of people who have never seen Spinal Tap know what it means to go to 11. In Memphis, while Ian deals with a hopelessly botched hotel reservation, Spinal Tap run into a rival musician, Duke Fame, played by heavy metal singer Paul Shortino of Rough Cut and Quiet Riot. Duke, whose career is clearly on a better trajectory than Spinal Tap's, is greeted by enthusiastic fans in the hotel lobby. His snobbish manager, played by WKRP in Cincinnati and head of the class star Howard Hessman, gives Spinal Tap the brush off. To add insult to injury, Ian gets the hotel reservation sorted out just in time to learn the Memphis gig has been cancelled. In a hotel room, the band's flagging spirits are revived when the radio plays one of their early hits from their Thamesmen days, Cups and Kings. The mood sours when the song ends and the DJ suggests Spinal Tap are washed up. The band members talk to Marty about an early hit, 1967's groovy Listen to the Flower People. At that time, their drummer was Peter James Bond, who spontaneously combusted on stage during a blues jazz festival. During a sound check before a gig, David's wife Janine, played by June Chadwick, known for the mid-80s Alien Invasion TV series V, arrives to join the band on tour, much to Nigel's dismay. Ian shows the appalled band members the label-approved replacement album cover, which just features a jacket of solid, unbroken black on the front, back, and spine. During a performance of rock and roll creation, the band members emerge out of giant alien pods. Derek's pod fails to open, and a roadie rushes on stage with an assortment of tools, including a hammer and a blowtorch, and tries to free him. Marty asks Mick Shrimpton if, considering how all previous Spinal Tap drummers have met bizarre and unexpected ends, he has any worry about falling prey to this apparent curse. Shrimpton is concerned, but feels the law of averages predicts he'll survive. Nigel plays a lovely classical composition of his own creation for Marty on the piano. He tells Marty it was inspired by Mozart and Bach, and he has titled it Lick My Love Pump. While going through airport security, Derek repeatedly sets off the metal detector. When a beleaguered security worker wands him down with a handheld detector, it's revealed that he has a foil-wrapped cucumber stuffed down the front of his pants. On stage, the band play Heavy Duty, which includes a break in the middle for Nigel's impassioned guitar solo to Boccherini's celebrated Minuet from 1771. At a Holiday Inn, they meet with Artie Fufkin, a promo guy from Polymer, who is played by David Letterman's longtime bandleader, Paul Schaefer. Due to Artie's incompetence, absolutely no one shows up for a live appearance from the band at a local record store. In Cleveland, the band members try to head to the stage for their gig and get hopelessly lost multiple times in the tangle of backstage corridors, despite the repeated attempts of a maintenance worker, played by comedian Wonderful Smith, to point them in the right direction. At a diner, everyone is glum about the rocky state of the tour and their low album sales. Janine suggests overhauling their stage look with outfits and face paint inspired by the signs of the zodiac. Nigel, who transparently loathes Janine, comes up with his own idea for a stage set inspired by the Stonehenge monoliths. He scribbles his design on a napkin, and Ian promises to make his scribbles a reality. A set designer, played by Angelica Houston, shows Ian her completed model based on Nigel's scribbles. It is much, much smaller than anticipated. Nigel, being Nigel, mistakenly wrote down 18 inches instead of 18 feet. So, on stage during the band's performance of their song Stonehenge, a pair of dancers dressed as elves cavort around the tiny and unimpressive Stonehenge replica and repeatedly knock it down. Later in the hotel, David chews out Ian over the screw-up, and Ian quits in a huff. Janine takes over as the band manager. Her first order of business is to create detailed astrological charts for the remainder of the tour stops. As David and Nigel's relationship deteriorates, Janine books Spinal Tap a gig at a dance at an Air Force base. They're shown the ropes by Lieutenant Bob Hookstratton, played by the late Fred Willard. Willard would go on to star in many of Christopher Guest's mockumentaries, including Best in Show and Waiting for Guffman. The band launch into their song Sex Farm, which seems to appall most of the people in attendance. The gig is a disaster, and Nigel quits the band and storms off halfway through the set. Now minus Nigel, Spinal Tap perform at a fair where they receive second billing behind a puppet show. They're forced to drastically rework their set list to accommodate the loss of Nigel. They ultimately opt to turn the show into a freeform jazz odyssey, complete with Janine on stage banging a tambourine. The final day of the tour arrives. As the demoralized band members tune up backstage, Nigel walks in and announces that Ian told him Sex Farm is tearing up the charts in Japan. Ian wants the band to reform and tour Japan. As Spinal Tap perform Tonight I'm Gonna Rock You Tonight, Nigel hangs out in the wings. At an encouraging nod from David, he runs on stage, picks up his guitar, and rejoins the band. Nigel's triumphant return is marred when Mick Shrimpton spontaneously combusts on stage. Equipped with a new drummer, Spinal Tap play a gig in Japan to an enthusiastic crowd. Just off stage, Ian gloats at a visibly annoyed Janine. In addition to the This Is Spinal Tap soundtrack, Spinal Tap have released two other albums, 1992's Break Like the Wind and 2009's Back from the Dead. These are not to be confused with Spinal Tap's fictional albums, which include Intravenous de Milo and Shark Sandwich. Spinal Tap have appeared in character on Saturday Night Live, they've made an appearance on The Simpsons, and they've toured off and on since the film's release, constantly blurring the line between a real band and a parody band. This Is Spinal Tap is a damn delight. While it wasn't a big hit upon release, it was well reviewed by critics, and it has since become a huge cult favorite. It's beloved by musicians for its affectionate portrayal of the lunacy of touring, the numerous bad decisions that are inevitably made while on the road, and the clueless arrogance that goes hand in hand with the rarefied life of being a rock star. It's widely reported that Ozzy Osbourne watched Spinal Tap and found its depiction of tour life so plausible that he didn't realize it was a parody. The film struck such a chord with musicians that multiple real-life bands, including Kiss, Black Sabbath, and Judas Priest, are at least partially convinced the film is based specifically on them. The 80s were a good decade for classic comedies, but This Is Spinal Tap is something special, particularly for anyone who loves music, be it heavy metal or pop or rock or whatever. A couple months back, I looked at Duran Duran's 1984 tour documentary, Sing Blue Silver, which, as I mentioned at the time, has moments of absurdity that are distinctly Spinal Tapian. The same applies to any tour documentary you can pick, going back to 1967 with D.A. Pennebaker's Don't Look Back, which profiled Bob Dylan's 1965 UK tour and which was a clear influence on Spinal Tap. This Is Spinal Tap is so effective at satire because it understands the music world and the tour life, and also because Rob Reiner assembled a large and talented group of performers who were clever enough to improvise an unending onslaught of hilarious scenes. Authentic and affectionate and very, very funny, This Is Spinal Tap has earned its secure place in the hearts of Gen Xers. Next time, Goonies Never Say Die, when I look at Richard Donner's 1985 teen adventure romp. Thank you very much for joining me here today. I will meet you back here for that.